The night they disappeared. It was October 31st, 1969, a cold, windless night in the small Michigan town of Idlewild. The leaves had already turned to rust and the streets were slick with rain. Children in masks ran door to door, laughing through the fog that drifted from the nearby marshes. But beyond the glow of porch lights and jack-o'-lanterns, on a narrow gravel road leading to Lake Idle, two young men were driving toward the dark. Their names were Thomas Spencer, age 21, and John Hobley, 22, friends since high school, both students at Muskegon Technical College. According to their classmates, they planned to attend a Halloween party in the old dance hall near the lake. They left Spencer's home just after 8:30 p.m. in a 1966 Plymouth Fury, with two carved pumpkins on the back seat, their candles still flickering. They never arrived. When morning came, the fog still clung to the ground like smoke. At 7:10 a.m., a park ranger found the Plymouth abandoned on the edge of Route 17, engine off, doors open, radio playing softly. The headlights still burned through the mist. Inside were both pumpkins, their flames extinguished but wax still warm. Thomas's jacket was draped neatly over the passenger seat. John's wallet lay on the dashboard. No keys, no footprints, no blood. The ranger radioed for assistance. By the time deputies arrived, the air smelled faintly metallic, like iron and rain. They combed the roadside for half a mile. Dogs refused to track. Their prints ended where the gravel turned to mud, and then simply stopped. The last trace was a single set of tire tracks leading from the road toward the lake, and then nothing. In the following hours, the small town of Idlewild transformed into a search grid. Police boats dragged the lake, helicopters scanned the forest. By nightfall, there was still no sign of the two men, but something else was found. At 9:42 p.m., nearly 24 hours after their disappearance, a farmer living 2 miles north reported strange lights over the woods. 3 spheres, red and gold, hovering silently. The lights moved slowly, then shot straight upward, vanishing into the clouds. Minutes later, a low-frequency hum rolled through the air, rattling the farmer's windows and stopping every clock in his house. When investigators returned to the site where the Plymouth had been found, they noticed something they had missed. The grass around the car was flattened in a perfect circle, 12 feet across. The soil was dry, almost baked, despite the rain. The sheriff's report described it as an area of unusual disturbance, possibly due to heat or static discharge. But one deputy, who later requested anonymity, told a different story. He claimed that when he stepped into the circle, the air grew warm and his radio hissed with a sound like breathing. The batteries drained in seconds. By November 3rd, the case was already sliding toward folklore. Locals whispered that the boys had been taken by a cult, or that they had run away. But the older residents of Idlewild remembered something else, a story from before the war about the lights that came back every 13 years. And that year, 1969, marked exactly 13 years since the last time the lights were seen over Lake Idle. The official search ended after 6 days, but on the 7th night, as the last rescue boat left the water, a volunteer claimed he saw 2 figures standing knee-deep in the lake, motionless, staring toward the shore. When the spotlight hit them, they were gone. All that remained was the faint glow of 2 candles, drifting slowly across the surface of the water. The town of Idlewild. To understand what happened that Halloween night, you first have to understand Idlewild itself. A place where time seems to move slower, where the air still smells like pine and rust, and where every street corner remembers more than it should. So, only a set of fresh footprints, leading into the water, but not back out. The Spencer-Hobley connection. Who were Thomas Spencer and John Hobley, the 2 young men who vanished on Halloween night, 1969? On paper, they were ordinary. In photographs, smiling. But as investigators began digging into their lives, ordinary started to crumble. Thomas Spencer, 21, was studying electrical engineering at Muskegon Technical College. Described as quiet and precise, he had a fascination with radio frequencies, shortwave, CB, and more recently, experimental long-range signals. In his dorm room, detectives found stacks of schematics, notebooks filled with coordinates, and a folder labeled Project Echo. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams of what looked like a homemade receiver, capable of picking up bands far beyond civilian radio. John Hobley, on the other hand, was the opposite. Outgoing, creative, a photography student with a taste for adventure. He and Thomas were inseparable, often spending weekends exploring abandoned places around Idlewild, the old observatory, collapsed mines, and the lake itself. Their friends said they were working on a Halloween project. When pressed, no one could explain what that meant. 2 days before they vanished, the pair borrowed a 35mm camera from the college lab, along with a reel-to-reel recorder. That recorder was later found in the trunk of Thomas's Plymouth, empty, its magnetic tape stripped clean as if erased by something stronger than magnetism. Technicians described it as like it had been exposed to a pulse. What made this all stranger was a police report buried in the county archives. On October 15, 1969, 2 weeks before the disappearance, Spencer had filed a noise complaint, not against the neighbor, but against an unidentifiable sound coming through his radio. He described it as metallic, rhythmic, like machinery underwater. The signal repeated every 13 seconds. When the sheriff's department dismissed it as interference, Thomas wrote in his notebook, "It's not random, it's responding." That line was underlined 3 times. After the disappearance, one of his classmates, Carol Whitman, came forward. She said the night before Halloween, the boys had asked her to help photograph the stars. They wanted to capture something that didn't move right. She turned them down. Later, she told reporters, "I thought they were joking, but Tom looked scared, not excited. He said, 'It's coming back.'" The same pattern from last time. I didn't know what that meant. Investigators would later discover that the pattern Spencer referred to matched a real event. In 1956, when the 2 fishermen vanished from the same lake, locals reported a series of unexplained radio distortions, exactly 13 seconds apart. The connection between both disappearances and the 13-year cycle began to solidify. But by the time the authorities noticed, both Spencer and Hobley had been missing for weeks. And then came another detail, almost lost in the chaos. On November 8th, a local newspaper received a letter postmarked from Detroit. It contained no return address, only a photograph. Discovery of the car. At 7:10 a.m. on November 1st, 1969, the morning after Halloween, Park Ranger Earl Henderson noticed something unusual as he drove along Route 17, the winding road that traced the edge of Lake Idle. Through the thinning fog, he saw what looked like headlights, faint and still burning. When he stopped, he realized the car wasn't parked, it was abandoned. The 1966 Plymouth Fury stood on the shoulder, door ajar, radio humming softly, the wipers scraping a dry windshield. The key was missing from the ignition, but the car battery was still alive. Inside, the air felt warm, stale, as if someone had just been there. 2 carved pumpkins sat on the back seat, their wax melted halfway down, their faces twisted in frozen grins. On the passenger seat, Thomas Spencer's jacket neatly folded. On the dashboard, John Hobley's wallet, open, a driver's license staring blankly at the windshield. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no shattered glass, no footprints. Henderson called it in at 7:22 a.m. By the time deputies arrived, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the tree line. They found tire marks veering slightly toward the ditch, as though the car had stopped suddenly. A trail of disturbed gravel led a few feet into the woods, and then vanished. When they brought the dogs, they refused to track past the road, whining and circling the same patch of ground where the trail ended. The air felt metallic, radios cut out completely. One deputy said it felt like standing under power lines. The car was towed. Gray dust found underneath turned out to be neither mineral nor organic, just foreign. Later, a perfect circle of flattened grass appeared at the site, 12 feet wide, soil baked dry despite the rain. Every compass brought near it spun uncontrollably. The sheriff's official report called it an unidentified environmental disturbance. But handwritten notes hinted at something darker, a connection to the 1956 disappearances. Whatever happened that night wasn't random. It was patterned. Witnesses and the light. In the days following the discovery of the car, the sheriff's department canvassed every farmhouse, cabin, and fishing shack near Lake Idle. At first, no one wanted to talk, But within 48 hours, stories began to surface, strange, fragmented, and all disturbingly similar. A farmer named Harold Miles claimed he had seen a ball of fire hovering above the tree line on the night of October 31st. He described it as no larger than a pickup truck, glowing red at the center and silent. His wife insisted it wasn't lightning. The sky didn't flash, she told deputies. It just stayed. Teenagers camping near the old Idlewild Pavilion reported hearing what they called a mechanical hum that pulsed through the air just before midnight. They said it was followed by a deep silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. When they stepped outside their tents, they saw a column of light rising from the lake, like a flashlight, but upside down. They didn't stay to see where it led. Then there was the story of the postman, Frank Keller, who drove Route 17 every morning at dawn. He told investigators he passed the same stretch where Spencer's car was later found, but that morning he had to stop because something was wrong with the road. He said the headlights dimmed, the radio died, and the air smelled like burnt wires. When he stepped out, he saw a figure standing in the fog. It wasn't moving, he said, just standing there, glowing faintly, like it was made of glass. The sheriff dismissed most of the witness accounts as hysteria or exaggeration, but a state trooper, reviewing Keller's testimony, noted that his patrol car radio had gone dead at the same time and place. In the official logs, the outage was marked as unexplained interference. That phrase would appear again and again in the months to come. By mid-November, a pattern began to form. The lights were seen every 13 years, always near the lake, always in late October. And each time, someone disappeared. Local folklore soon merged with paranoia. Some called it the 13th cycle, others simply the return. The photographs. When investigators examined the items found in Spencer's car, one object stood out, a camera. It was a 35mm Kodak, the same one the boys had borrowed from the college lab 2 days before Halloween. The film roll inside was partially exposed, the edge scorched as if by heat. Technicians from Lansing carefully developed the negatives, and what they found only deepened the mystery. The first few frames were ordinary, grainy shots of the road, blurred silhouettes, the headlights of another car in the distance. But halfway through the reel, the tone changed. The next 5 photos appeared to have been taken in rapid succession, the final moments before whatever happened to them. One image showed the lake under fog, faint ripples disturbing the surface. The next, streaks of white light arcing across the frame. The third, a shape, tall and thin, standing at the water's edge. It wasn't human. It seemed translucent, like light bent around it. Experts dismissed it as lens flare, but the pattern didn't match the camera's optics. Frame 4 was darker, almost black, except for a faint glow in the upper corner. And the 5th photo, the last one on the roll, was completely overexposed, washed in blinding white. The light bled across the image, forming something like a circle, or a door. In the days that followed, the prints were quietly seized by state investigators. When local reporters asked about them, Sheriff Daniels said only that the photos were of no evidentiary value. But one lab technician, speaking off record, claimed he saw something the others ignored. He described faint outlines along the edges of the overexposed frame, what looked like 2 faces, blurred and stretched as though caught mid-motion. The technician said the expressions were not fear, exactly, but awe. Soon after, the negatives went missing from evidence. A request to review the files months later returned the note misfiled or lost. No backup prints existed, except one. A small contact sheet, printed for identification, survived in the sheriff's office archive. Years later, a retired deputy named Hal Morris found it folded between pages of an old case log. He described what he saw as a window to nowhere. He kept it for 3 days before turning it over to the county museum, but when curators went to collect it, it was gone. To this day, no one knows who took it. Some say the photos were destroyed by officials. Others claim they were bought by a private collector or confiscated by the federal government. Whatever the truth, that last image, the white circle, would soon become the symbol of the entire case. The theories begin. By late November 1969, the Spencer-Hobley disappearance had moved from tragedy to obsession. Idlewild, once a quiet lakeside town, was now crawling with journalists, UFO researchers, and self-proclaimed psychics. The official investigation had stalled, but the rumors had not. 3 dominant theories emerged, each more unsettling than the last. The first was the cult theory. Locals whispered that the boys had stumbled upon a ritual site deep in the woods, remnants of a forgotten sect that met every 13 years. Symbols carved into trees near the lake were cited as evidence, though most were later proven to be nothing more than graffiti. Still, the sheriff privately admitted that the soil samples from the circle contained high levels of phosphorus, the kind found in old ceremonial fires. The second theory was more scientific, or so it claimed. A professor from the University of Michigan, Dr. Ernest Kell, suggested that the area around Lake Idle might be a geomagnetic anomaly, a place where the Earth's magnetic field was distorted enough to cause hallucinations or even temporary disorientation. He proposed that the boys had wandered into one of these fields, lost track of direction, and drowned in the lake. But divers found no bodies, and the readings Kell's team took were anything but normal. Their compasses spun, and electronic equipment shorted out, just as the sheriff's deputies had reported. The third theory, the one newspapers loved, was the extraterrestrial connection. The Idlewild lights had been seen for decades, always during the same season, always following the same pattern. UFO enthusiasts claimed the boys were taken by something non-human, citing the missing time, the interference, and the circle near the car. A small group calling itself Project Aether even published a pamphlet titled The Visitors of Idlewild, claiming the site was part of a larger network of contact zones stretching across the Great Lakes region. What most people didn't know was that Project Aether wasn't entirely fringe. One of its members, a man named Dr. Leonard Voss, was a former engineer who'd worked under contract with the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Base, the same facility long rumored to house recovered foreign technology. Voss visited Idlewild quietly in December, met privately with Sheriff Daniels, and left town the next morning. No record of their conversation exists. Within a week, federal agents arrived in unmarked cars, claiming to be consultants. They took over the evidence, sealed the files, and ordered all local reports to be redirected to Lansing. The case was officially reclassified as closed national interest. After that, talk of the boys faded, the lights stopped, and Idlewild returned to silence. But the silence didn't last. The police tapes. In early December, nearly 5 weeks after the Spencer-Hobley disappearance, a box was discovered deep in the evidence room of the Idlewild Sheriff's Department. It was unmarked, unlogged, and covered in a fine layer of gray dust. Inside were 2 reel-to-reel audio tapes labeled simply October 31st. They had been recovered from the trunk of Thomas Spencer's Plymouth, and somehow, no one had ever played them. Deputy Hal Morris volunteered to run the tapes. He set up the player in the small interview room behind the sheriff's office. The first reel began with static, sharp, uneven bursts that rose and fell like breathing. Then, faintly, voices. It was them. Thomas Spencer could be heard laughing nervously, saying something about getting the shot and checking exposure. John's voice followed, calmer, describing movement near the tree line. The recording went quiet for several seconds. Then, faintly, a mechanical hum began to grow in the background, low, rhythmic pulsing every 13 seconds. Deputy Morris noted that the frequency registered between 19 and 20 hertz, low enough to cause unease in the human body, the kind of vibration that could make your chest feel hollow. The hum intensified. Thomas whispered, "It's right above us." A sharp metallic snap echoed through the speaker. Then the tape erupted in distortion, shrill, overlapping frequencies that no one could explain. When the sound finally cleared, something else came through, not voices, but a tone. Clean, perfect, unwavering. Experts who later examined the recording found the tone to be exactly 13,000 hertz, an impossibly precise frequency for an analog recorder of that era. The second reel was stranger still. It began mid-sentence, with John saying, "Tom, don't look straight at it." The rest was chaos, scraping, wind, and a single final phrase, faint and broken. "It's not a light, it's a hole." The tape cut off. When Deputy Morris tried to replay the recording, both reels jammed, the tape curling into itself as if magnetized. Every copy made afterward captured only static. The original tapes were later sent to Lansing for technical analysis. They were never seen again. But Morris claimed something else, something he never told the sheriff officially. He said that when the second reel played that last line, every fluorescent light in the room dimmed for exactly 13 seconds. And during that silence, he could swear he heard footsteps coming from inside the evidence vault. The missing hours. When investigators revisited the timeline of Halloween night, something didn't fit. The boys left the Spencer home at 8:30 p.m., heading toward Idlewild. The abandoned Plymouth was discovered around 7:10 a.m. the next morning, meaning they should have arrived at the party by 9 p.m. at the latest. But according to all reports, no one ever saw them arrive. Worse, the police couldn't account for nearly 4 hours of their movements. The last confirmed sighting came from a gas station attendant in Baldwin, about 20 minutes from Idlewild. He remembered the car clearly, a white Plymouth, 2 young men, and Halloween pumpkins glowing on the back seat. They bought gas, paid cash, and left at 8:47 p.m. After that, they were gone. Sheriff Daniels had assumed they vanished sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. But when the car's dashboard clock was examined, it showed a frozen time, 10:27 p.m. That would have made sense if the clock had simply stopped when the car's battery drained. Except the radio was still playing when the ranger found it. And the clock hands weren't just stopped. They were fused, melted into the faceplate. Things got stranger when a deputy compared the timestamps on the recovered photographs. The last picture, the one overexposed in white light, had a development marker of 2:14 a.m., hours after the car should have stopped moving. Forensic experts confirmed the film's metadata matched that time, meaning the photos were taken long after the boys should have been gone. Then came the radios. Every police car that responded that night had its internal log reviewed later, at exactly 10:27 p.m., the same time as the frozen dashboard clock. All 3 control frequencies cut out for 13 seconds. No static, no noise, just silence. Deputy Cross, still recovering from his ear injuries, told a reporter off the record that the clocks in his own home had stopped at the same time. His wife swore to it too. Across Idlewild, at least 6 residents later claimed their watches had stopped that night between 10:25 and 10:30. When restarted, they all ran 13 minutes slow. The phrase "missing hours" became shorthand for the gap no one could explain. Reporters tried to build theories: mass hysteria, electrical surge, even solar flares, but nothing accounted for the photographic timestamps, the fused dashboard clock, or the synchronized 13-second silence. In 1970, a physicist from Chicago, Dr. Howard Meacham, proposed a bizarre idea. What if, for a brief period, time itself had been disrupted? He called it localized temporal displacement, suggesting that some unknown energy event could have caused nonlinear slippage, a fold in time rather than space. His paper was dismissed as pseudoscience, but when he tried to reproduce the frequencies from the police tapes, his equipment overloaded and melted a copper coil. When asked later why he kept researching, Meacham said only one thing: because something in those 13 seconds was watching back. The search operation. The search for Thomas Spencer and John Hobley became the largest coordinated operation Idlewild had ever seen. For 3 days, volunteers, police, and National Guard units combed the surrounding woods, marshes, and the shoreline of Lake Idle. Helicopters circled low, dragging infrared scanners over the forest canopy, while sonar buoys rippled across the water surface. The effort, though exhaustive, produced nothing except more questions. Day 1 brought the divers. The lake, shallow near the banks, dropped sharply at the center, a dark, silent pit where light could not reach. Visibility below 15 feet was 0. Divers reported a dense metallic taste in the water and strange vibrations that made their equipment rattle. One diver described it as like a heartbeat coming through the floor of the lake. On the second day, a unit using magnetic sensors detected an anomaly beneath the mud, an object roughly cylindrical, about 8 feet long, buried 30 feet down. At first, they believed it could be a boat wreck, But when they tried to lower the grappling hook, the line went taut and snapped clean off as if it had hit solid rock. When they returned later with heavier gear, the signal was gone. Meanwhile, search dogs on the northern shore began acting erratically. Handlers said the animals refused to go near the reeds, pulling back and whining, their hair standing on end. A veterinary specialist brought in from Grand Rapids noted elevated adrenaline levels comparable to an electrical stimulus. By the third day, the operation had taken on a grim tone. Reporters called it the Halloween haunting. Locals watched from porches as trucks rolled in and men in suits took over the command tent. The sheriff was no longer in charge. When asked who was, he only said, "They're from Lansing." That night, the lake glowed. Witnesses described a pale shimmer rippling beneath the surface, faint but visible even from the road. It lasted 13 seconds, then vanished. All electronic equipment in the search perimeter malfunctioned simultaneously. Sonar feeds cut to black, radios died, and even the floodlights dimmed before returning at half power. One diver reported his depth gauge spinning like a compass in a storm. The next morning, several small metallic fragments were recovered along the shore, smooth, gray, and unnaturally light. When analyzed, the fragments were determined to be composed of an unknown alloy containing trace elements not found in terrestrial samples. Before further testing could be done, federal agents removed them from the lab. The documentation of their analysis was sealed. On November 10th, the operation officially ended. The area was declared secure and closed to the public. Barricades were erected along Route 17, and warning signs were posted citing unstable ground. But locals said the real reason was simpler. Something had woken up beneath the lake, and no one wanted to see it again. After the search, the waterline around Idlewild dropped by nearly 2 feet overnight, as if the lake had exhaled. Return of the camera. 2 weeks after the official search ended, the mystery deepened again. On the morning of November 24, 1969, a small cardboard box appeared in the mailbox of the Spencer family home in Muskegon. It was unmarked, with no return address, postmarked locally. Inside was a camera, the same 35mm Kodak that had vanished from police custody weeks earlier. The camera was clean, too clean. The serial number had been filed off, and every visible fingerprint removed. Only one thing was new, a thin layer of fine gray dust coating the lens, the same strange residue found on the underside of the Plymouth Fury. Thomas's father, Robert Spencer, handed it immediately to the authorities. Sheriff Daniels arrived within hours, escorted by 2 federal agents. They examined the package, took photographs, and sealed it in a plastic evidence bag. When asked if the camera contained film, the sheriff hesitated before saying, "No comment." But later that evening, an anonymous technician from the county lab leaked information to a local reporter. According to him, the camera did contain a roll of film, partially exposed. The first half matched the known sequence of photos already recovered from the earlier reel. But the last 3 frames were new. Frame 1, a distorted view of what looked like the interior of a cave or tunnel, illuminated by a single harsh light. The texture of the walls appeared metallic or wet. Frame 2, a blur of motion, possibly a hand reaching toward the lens. Frame 3, a perfect circle of light, black at the center, white around the edge, identical to the overexposed final photo from the previous roll. Before the technician could print the negatives, 2 men from Lansing arrived and confiscated everything: the film, the prints, the camera, even the work order. The lab log for that day was later found with a single line crossed out in red ink: "Do not process, federal hold." Within 24 hours, the Spencer mailbox was empty again. Neighbors reported seeing a black sedan parked across the street that night, engine running, lights off. No one saw who was inside. 3 days later, Mrs. Spencer received a phone call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was male, calm, and monotone. It said only 4 words before the line went dead: "Tell them we're fine." Phone company records confirmed the call lasted exactly 13 seconds. That recording, and the camera, were never seen again. But the timing of the event was undeniable. 13 days after the official search had ended, and exactly 13 minutes past 9 a.m., the parcel had been delivered. Coincidence or not, the pattern had returned. The audio distortion. In early December 1969, just as the case was beginning to fade from the headlines, radio operators across Michigan started reporting strange interference in their frequencies. It began as static, a low hum that rose and fell in pulses, and then evolved into something else entirely. The first report came from an amateur radio club in Grand Rapids. Their equipment, tuned to a state emergency channel, began picking up faint, rhythmic tones around 2 a.m. When one of the members tried to record it, his tape deck emitted a brief flash of light and burned out. The sound was later described as a Morse signal without pauses, repeating a single coded pattern, H31. Within days, similar signals were detected by other operators, some as far as Ohio and Indiana. The strange tone followed a strict pattern, bursts every 13 seconds, each lasting precisely 2 seconds. Attempts to triangulate the source all led back to one location, Lake Idle. Sheriff Daniels received reports from both the Michigan State Police and the FAA. Pilots flying over the region had experienced compass malfunctions, and in one instance, a radar technician in Detroit recorded a sudden vertical return, a blip that appeared directly over the lake, ascended rapidly, and then vanished from all screens. The timestamp was 10:27 p.m., the same frozen moment from the night Spencer and Hobley disappeared. To verify the radio signals, a university physics team set up portable antennas near the water. At exactly 11:13 p.m., their oscilloscopes captured the first of several identical bursts. The waveform, when analyzed, didn't match any known frequency modulation. It was too clean, too deliberate. When slowed down, the tone revealed a faint secondary pattern, an underlying vibration that pulsed like a heartbeat. And then, something impossible happened. As the recording played back through the lab speakers, the glass window overlooking the water rattled from the inside. The scientists shut everything down, assuming feedback. But one graduate student swore she heard voices behind the tone, whispering, overlapping, unintelligible. The recordings were sent to a federal acoustic lab for review. The official report stated only, source indeterminate, possible reflection anomaly. But the lead technician privately told a reporter that the interference wasn't bouncing from the atmosphere, it was coming up from below. The local papers dubbed it the idle signal. For 2 weeks, it persisted every night, fading precisely at dawn. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped, forever. The final pulse, recorded on December 13, 1969, ended with a fragment of sound almost lost in the noise. When isolated, it resembled a single human breath, followed by a soft, distant whisper, "Still here." The hidden file in January 1970, as the snow buried the last traces of the Spencer-Hobley case, a quiet discovery reignited the investigation. It came not from the police, but from a young intern working at the county courthouse archives. While sorting through mislabeled storage boxes, she came across a sealed manila envelope marked only with a single code, HOB 13A. Inside were carbon-copied notes, a half-burned photograph, and a single sheet of microfilm. The notes bore the handwriting of Sheriff Daniels, dated November 2nd, the week after the disappearance. They detailed a restricted evidence review conducted at the State Forensic Lab in Lansing, mentioning film anomalies and sequence inconsistencies. The final line was chilling. Further analysis may provoke unwanted attention. The photograph, though partially destroyed, revealed 2 young men standing near what looked like the shoreline of Lake Idle. The shadows behind them stretched unnaturally long, as if from multiple light sources. A faint ring of mist, circular and dense, hovered above the water. It was faintly visible only under infrared light, something no camera of that era should have captured. The microfilm was worse. When developed, it contained fragments of what appeared to be newspaper clippings, but not from any known publication. The headlines were cryptic, as if printed from drafts that never made it to print. 2 youths vanish, officials warn silence. Federal presence grows in rural Michigan. Lights return to idle again. The intern brought her find to her supervisor, who quietly reported it to the sheriff's office. Within 24 hours, the envelope was gone, signed out by a special liaison agent. No such title existed in county records. But before the file disappeared, the intern had managed to make a single photocopy of the sheriff's note. When she showed it to a local journalist weeks later, it had faded to near blankness, as though bleached from within. Under ultraviolet light, however, one additional line appeared in ghostly blue ink beneath the sheriff's signature. "They're not missing. They were taken back. No one ever saw the original files again. The microfilm canister was never logged into evidence. The half-burned photo was never retrieved, and Sheriff Daniels resigned abruptly 3 months later, citing personal reasons. In his final interview, when asked about the envelope, he simply said, "Some things are safer lost." The intern left town soon after and was never interviewed again. Her name does not appear in any local directory or census. Even her employment record at the courthouse was quietly deleted from state archives. But one line from her private diary survived, recovered years later by her family. It read, "I thought I'd found a secret, but it found me first." The Hobley tape 5 years passed before the Spencer-Hobley case resurfaced again. By then, most people had forgotten, or forced themselves to. The lake was calm, the woods had grown thick again, and the name Idlewild had drifted back into small-town obscurity. Then, in the spring of 1974, a plain brown envelope arrived at the home of the Hobley family in Grand Rapids. There was no return address, no postage, just a strip of tape sealing the flap. Inside was a single cassette labeled in smudged black marker, October 31st, 1969. John's mother, Ellen Hobley, called the police before playing it. But curiosity, or desperation, got the better of her. She placed the tape into an old Panasonic player and pressed play. At first, only static filled the room, a low rhythmic pulse, rising and falling like waves. Then came a voice. It was John, weak, distorted, but unmistakable. "Mom," he said, "if you hear this, don't come looking. We're still here. It's not what we thought." The audio cracked, the tone bending into something mechanical. Another voice followed, fainter, urgent. "Thomas, it's not light, it's a gate." Then silence for 13 full seconds. When sound returned, the tape captured a distant humming, familiar to those who'd studied the police recordings. Then, layered beneath it, something else, whispering. A dozen voices, speaking in unison, forming words no one could fully decipher. Some listeners claimed to hear phrases like "return" and "wake the circle." Others heard nothing but noise. Investigators took possession of the cassette that evening. The official report noted severe magnetic warping, as if the tape had been partially erased and rewritten multiple times. But the strangest detail came from a forensic technician who tried to play the recording in reverse. He claimed that when reversed, the 13-second gap wasn't silent at all. It contained a tone rising steadily in pitch, ending with a single human breath. The Hobley family was never given the tape back. When Mrs. Hobley requested a copy, she was told the evidence was in federal review. The next day, she received a call from an unlisted number. The voice on the line said, "Your son wanted you to know. It's not over." The call lasted exactly 13 seconds. Years later, a retired postal worker from Idlewild confessed that he'd seen 2 men leaving the Hobley residence the night before the envelope was found. They were wearing identical gray coats, driving a government vehicle with no plates. He remembered one of them clearly, because his face looked familiar. When shown an old yearbook photo of John Hobley, he whispered, "That's him." The statement was never entered into record, and so the Hobley tape became the final, physical artifact of the case. A whisper from a place that should not exist, caught in a loop that repeated every 13 years, as if waiting for someone to listen again. The 13th light. It's been over half a century since the night Thomas Spencer and John Hobley vanished from that lonely Michigan road, but the echoes of their story refused to die. Every Halloween since 1969, locals claim to see strange lights hovering over Lake Idle, 13 of them drifting in a perfect circle before fading one by one into the mist. In 1982, a television crew arrived to film a special segment on the case. Their equipment worked perfectly during the day, cameras sharp, audio clean. But as dusk fell and fog rolled across the lake, their monitors began to flicker. When they reviewed the footage later, one frame stood out. For less than a second, between static bursts, 2 silhouettes appeared standing on the shoreline. One of the cameramen swore he saw them raise their hands, as if signaling toward the lens. He quit the project that night. ... Later analysis of the film revealed something even stranger. An embedded timestamp, not from their own camera, but burned into the frame itself. The digits read 10:27 p.m., October 31st, 1969. Over the years, countless theories have surfaced. Some blame a government experiment gone wrong, secret tests in electromagnetism, or communication with submarines beneath the Great Lakes. Others claim it was something ancient, something that predates the town, drawn by ritual, by energy, by the repeating pattern of 13. The most disturbing clue came in 1995, when a group of amateur divers explored the deepest part of Lake Idle. Sonar readings showed an unnatural cavity on the lakebed, perfectly circular, over 20 meters across. They never found the bottom. Their equipment failed one by one, until only the audio feed remained. The last recorded words from the dive leader were simple and terrified. "They're standing in a ring." The transmission ended abruptly. No trace of the divers was ever recovered. Even now, the case file of Spencer and Hobley sits in the county archives, sealed, redacted, and stamped closed. But those who've dared to reopen it say there's one final page that doesn't belong. Typed in faded blue ink, dated decades later, it reads, "Experiment successful. Pattern persists." Await next cycle. And every Halloween night, when the fog creeps over Lake Idle, residents still gather on the hillside, watching the dark water and counting the lights, waiting to see if this year the 13th will appear. So when people ask what happened to the two boys who vanished on Halloween night, no one agrees on the truth. Some say they were taken, others say they never left. But one thing is certain, at 10:27 p.m. at 2017, if you stand by that shore long enough, you might still hear their voices through the static, whispering from somewhere deep below the surface. We're still here.